Hello and welcome everybody. Hopefully you can see and hear me. Welcome to this episode of Dan Assor podcast. We're live on Friday. Hopefully you can see me. If people can give me some sort of comment and let me know that you're here, that would be absolutely appreciated. So I can see myself on LinkedIn, so I think we're there. So before my guest joins me, my special guest today, I just want to thank you all for watching. Thank you all for watching my videos as well. Remember, you can watch all of my content on YouTube, Facebook, Apple and Spotify and audio, and also follow me on Twitter. Just search Dan Assor. Just want to thank all of my community patrons for their support. Hyve Group, Tarsus, 19 Group, SISO, and Easyfairs. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my special guest, who's Andrew Evans, MD of Thorough Events.
Morning, everybody. Very good. Happy Friday to you.
Did that introduction work? Look, there you go. We actually got you on straight away on cue. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, it's Friday. It's stopped raining. What's not to love?
Well, absolutely. I'm staring out of a very sunny window. So thank you so much for joining. I think we've got quite a few people on today, so that's really good. Thank you, everyone. So, Andrew, we've got a bit to get through. A light-hearted chat and discussion. Keep it nice and positive for all of our viewers out there today. Just to say as well, guys, if you have to drop out of the conversation, you can watch the full show on demand on this event page. So we've got about 30 to 45 minutes because I've got to go and pick up a dog, as Andrew knows. I've got to head to Lancashire, so that should be fun. That is within the rules. Andrew, you have been in the industry, and I've got sort of a resume here from your LinkedIn profile for many years. I think it says on here.
That's a kind way of putting it.
Well, it says 30 plus, but I don't know when you put this on LinkedIn, so it could have been many years ago. You've been doing lots of different things. You work for some of the top organisers. You've done a load of different events. What drives your passion? First off, I like to ask my guests what keeps you going.
I think passion is a really overused word in the same way that entrepreneur is. But the answer to the question is, I fell into this event world like most people do.
Sure.
I should add that without giving too many sort of years away, the internet was not present. Computers, when I joined Montgomery, actually, I think it was 1985. We had one computer, We had a telex machine. So I kind of traversed through the digital age. But there's no question that the reason to stay in the sector, or at least for the reason that I've found, is the reward that it brings. And by that, we all know not necessarily financial. It's much more of an emotive thing. And I just adore working with positive, spirited people who are in the business of creating experiences. And it doesn't matter whether it's a trade show or a consumer show. There is nothing that can usurp the experience of pre-open night when the fairies come into the hall, sprinkle their magic dust and turn carnage into a beautiful setting in the next morning. And then there's this emotive thing about spending 2, 3, and when I started, it were 5-day trade shows I was working on with the International Food Exhibition. And then at the end of it, you watch it being ripped to pieces by your contractors. And you think, oh shit, but then you go again, and I suppose it's a bit crass to say it, but I rather like the showmanship of it all, to be honest with you, bringing people together, giving them great experiences.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And I think vast majority of my guests say the same thing, really. I think also if you're going to be in an industry for so long, you've got to enjoy what you do, right? As you say.
My thing is you have to metaphorically want to skip to work. This is not about dragging your carcass on a train, getting there, watching a clock. This is. I suppose the event world consumes you such that it's an omnipresent part of your life. There are no borders, no boundaries, because often that's what's required to get stuff done. So yeah, and actually, I've met some amazing people, and it's true to say that over 30 plus years, you form really great friendships with people, long-lasting friendships. Yeah. And by and large, the community that we work in are centered around good human beings. Greed is not king, and they tend to look after each other. And actually, we've seen more of that. I think that, if there is a positive to come out of casting our eyes back to March, we've seen some great behaviours amongst some people in our sector, and that kind of reminds me of why I do what I do, or why I've done what I've done for as long as I have.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Me personally, the last 6 months or 3 months of doing this sort of thing, I've met. When I say met, obviously I haven't met them in person. We've never met, but we've spoken a few times, and that it runs true with so many people that I've met on this platform or others, and they've been so kind and so passionate about what they do. You were very, I'm going to say privileged. You might say not, to run a couple of different events last year, right? When most of us, well, pretty much all of us, everyone I know, couldn't. I guess specifically because they're outdoors. Can you just bring to life the events that Thorough Events produce? Because I know they're slightly different. And yeah, if you start with that, and then we'll talk about how you managed to get them up and running.
Okay, so I don't want to drown people in detail, but I think there is a very important context. In my time, I've worked on, I think, across pretty much every platform there is. So be it B2B, be it consumer, be it international, domestic, whatever. And you would categorize what we do as consumer event organizing, but it's consumer with a slight twist, in the sense that we run concours, which are competitions for, in this instance, privately owned, very rare, consequently very valuable automobiles, cars. Okay. So it's a bit like, I suppose the parallel is a bit like a curator of an art gallery. If the cars are art, we choose to place them in the most amazing settings. We're very fortunate as a business to have a lot of trust around some extraordinary venues, not least of which is the Royal Household. So we have run and do utilise from time to time royal estates, including the Royal Household, so Windsor Castle, inside Windsor Castle. I mean, that's truly coveted space. Yeah. So the answer to the question is, we're consumer event organisers specialising in rare cars and the communities that engage themselves in that subject, in that collecting field.
Okay, and as I said, you were able to put on your, I think, 2 shows, for want of a better word, last year, August and September, in these fantastic venues. Now, obviously, at the time, and I've got in front of me, well, half of it's on the floor actually, a load of the All Secure Standard guidelines, which are clearly not going to run through line by line because that would be very dull, but nevertheless quite important. Can you bring to life and give our viewers watching the sort of learnings that you took from that and what you sort of had to do, and then also the appreciation, because I know we spoke about beforehand, for the operational teams that had to implement these rules, if you like, and regulations?
Yeah, so we started the year, we started the year believing that things would be normal, that we would have a June tenancy at the Honourable Artillery Company in the city for our London concours, and that 3 months later we would be at Hampton Court Palace in their beautiful gardens, running the Concours of Elegance, which is our flagship. Of course, that all changed, and we got together in March and did some really difficult navel gazing, and the subject of the conversation was very simply the choices. So right now, we were faced with some pretty bleak financial options. Do we not run these shows? Do we hunker down, hope that the vicious wind will blow over and that things will return to normal in 21? That inevitably would lead to a tremendous financial loss for the business, because it's overhead and no revenue at that point. What do we assume an opportunity to run the shows, probably through deferring the dateline, which is actually, of course, what we ended up doing with the London concours, which was scheduled to be in the first week of June. And then if we were to run these 2 events, what on earth would the impact of trying to navigate a COVID environment and a very depressed environment look like? So we did the tough bit first, which was to write some pretty awful budget assumptions, and none of them assumed we were going to run the bath with acid milk, by the way. But what we felt was that
I've never heard that.
That's my Roman background. But what it meant was we were faced with some choices, really. If enabled to run these events, what would they look like financially? As a business, you have to consider that. What's the merit, therefore, in going ahead? And we felt that for continuity's sake, if we were able to go ahead, then we should, particularly around the London show, because it was only 3 years in the making. So, if we drop out for a year, you're kind of gone at that point. And an awful lot of blood, sweat and finance had gone into launching and creating that event. So that was the first thing. The second thing then was to navigate the environment that we found ourselves in. And I have to say there are a few sort of streams that run through this, one of which is collaboration. And there is no question that without the collaboration of the venue and of individual contractors associated with our event, we wouldn't have been able to run this. I had it wasn't an epiphany, it was more a moment of an eruption, really, around a cup of tea over breakfast, watching the news, seeing that at the time, and I think it was around May time, that the government had permissioned public markets to open. And it caused me to have an excitement, but then to be really cross, because I thought, actually, that's a bit irresponsible. Public markets are places very similar to what we do. They're public spaces in which a buyer meets a seller to transact, hopefully, around a subject matter. But the difference between what public markets offered and what we did was that we were able, under a very controlled environment, to manage the number of people that were coming, to trace where those people were coming from, and to act responsibly. And I suppose that was the impetus, that was the driver that made me say, right, we're getting on with this. We're going to find a way of doing this. And I hope we come on to talk about mindset later, but there is no question that without, and in my instance, it was a bloody mindset. I will make this happen. I've just seen something that I don't necessarily agree with, but if that is the rule, then I'm going to find a way to adapt my event to enable it to run. And of course, the first stage there was to call the venue, talk to the HAC, talk to Rowan, who was magnificent throughout, and her team throughout all of this, and say, look, I can't foresee a June dateline being real, but could you please look at some options for me to run later in the year? And we in the end settled on a dateline in August, when traditionally, of course, the world would be resting or abroad, but we figured that wouldn't be the case last year. So with the collaboration of the venue, who in turn took what I look back now and I think, well, that's a bit laughable, but I called it a blueprint. It was a piece of A4 paper on which, over that cup of tea, I'd scribed all the things I thought I would have to do to enable this to happen, all of the protocols. And I shared that with the venue, and then we crafted a plan. And that plan, through the venue, was shared with the local authority and in turn all of the agencies that we deemed necessary to be able to open the doors and not fear a knock on the door and an unwanted "you can't go ahead." Sure. So the first lesson there, I suppose, is we took our proposition to the authorities rather than hoping that the authorities didn't, I suppose, in some way discover things that we were doing that they didn't like. And there were many things that came out of that. The first, and I suppose the most impactful one, was in and around capacities. So we have a footprint in that venue of, give or take, I think it's 5.5 acres. And the venue gave us a calculation that said that we could have 1,800 people at any one time. And our show's quite transient, so people come, it's a 2-hour dwell time, possibly 3 if you're having lunch and being entertained, and then they leave. So that doesn't mean we were bound to 1,800 people a day, but it did mean that, set against the previous incarnations of the event, where we'd had sort of 3,000-4,000 people a day, we were going to have to adjust our mindset. Secondly, we were going to have to get used to some different modelling, and particularly the modelling around hospitality, because we were used to serving, some really fantastic 3-course plated meals, waiter service, champagne receptions, and all that.
You've got all the mingling, yeah, all the mingling of people in here, yeah.
Exactly. So of course, if you're working as we do with a champagne partner, they want to make sure that the guest experience is as rewarding for their brand as it is for our own. Sure. And it's quite hard in hospitality, in that environment, to create a genuine feel of hospitality, because what you're trying to do is minimize the interaction between staff and guest. And what that ultimately results in is the guest doing a lot of the, I suppose, the legwork themselves.
Yeah.
So in crude terms, we presented a marquee that would, under normal circumstances, have hosted about 450 guests. We were permissioned to have about 126 in there. So around yield, it's a horror story. But what we then had to consider was how we would deliver an exemplary food service proposition. And we chose to do so through bento boxes. I don't know if you've come across these, but we worked really hard with the hospitality caterer, CSCs, who were brilliant, produced the most stunning 4-course meal in a box. And then we presented that to our guests. Those boxes were already placed at tables when guests were seated. So all of the experiences changed around us. And there are some things that kind of came out of that process that we would choose now to adopt, irrespective of a pandemic environment, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what also strikes me there is obviously innovation. So we're going to have to be innovative as we move forward. Because also it's going to be a different environment for our visitors, or if they're trade show organisers listening, delegates. And ordinarily, where people eat food, catering, VIP lounges is where really people congregate. So that's going to be quite an interesting dynamic about how, when we go back to live, whether it's outdoors or indoors, people want to meet and eat and drink and that sort of stuff. And actually, typically, in my experience, on trade shows specifically, that's where business is done. So I think you're right. It's about collaboration, isn't it? Working with the venues, local authorities, government, your exhibitors, and also visitors. So in your experience of those events, in terms of the feedback from visitors about some of the features like catering or anything else, I know it was outside, but were they receptive? Because I'm just thinking about mobilizing. How do we mobilize visitors going forward in terms of instilling confidence?
And it was a considerable challenge, because if I tell you that our model is not predicated on high audience attendance.
Sure.
So it's a bit complicated, but give or take 70% of the guests that come because they've been invited by our partners. Okay. That's my metaphor for sponsors. So therefore, unlike a lot of consumer events, which the success of which is predicated on vast audience gate revenue, that was not the primary concern. And that was very helpful to us in this environment, as was the fact that we were outdoors. The truth of the matter is that there were so many people that didn't believe that we were going to run these events.
Yeah.
Because up until that point, they hadn't seen any. I think there was a very credible event that took place about a week before us in Peterborough, caravan event. But certainly in and around the automotive scene, everything had been cancelled. The calendar had been wiped clean. And we found ourselves in a situation where news media weren't prepared to do previews around our event because they simply didn't believe it was going to happen. Yeah. I should add, we created something that we then, we are now branding in the sense, which is a COVID promise, which means that was there any likelihood of us having to cancel the show, we would refund vested parties, be that audience, be that commercial parties. That would have killed us, by the way, but we were going to do it when it was a promise that we hold true going into this year's cycle as well. But when the audience got there, I've got to tell you, at both events, there was, and I haven't seen this before in anything like the measure, there was a palpable excitement, a palpable appreciation that we had given them something that they craved to engage in for so long. They'd been bereft of so much social activity, but in this area, and this area is a genuine subject matter interest, which is passion. It's passion led. You don't collect cars unless you're passionate about that subject. Then we gave them something that tapped into their I suppose their positive emotions, and they were really appreciative.
So I think also, you make a good point. Obviously, that's a specialist market, but personally, and people I talk to more and more, if you're running any sort of event now, the reasons to attend have to be really, really high and obvious. If you're going to assume any element of risk, and this is both from a company perspective, delegate exhibitors, then you have to understand what you're going to get back in return. So the days of just ambling across a show, I'm not saying are over, but you really have to understand what's in it for you. And I think one of the positives that come out of this is going to force organisers to be ever more creative with the curation of their events. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd like to come on to that a bit later, because I think that plays to, and by the way, I'm not Nostradamus. Anyone who knows me will know that that is true. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have any more gift than the next person in the street.
Or a long beard.
Well, in the Bible, they say that people with a beard are wise. So who knows?
That's a whole different. Fair enough. We'll get on to that. I know, Andrew, you talk a lot. I've heard a lot about you speak about mindset.
Yeah.
Okay. And if we're going to get back to doing what we want to do, having a mindset that allows us to do that. Can you just explain for the viewers what you mean by that?
Well, I think that there are, and we faced it. There were obvious choices: batten down the hatches and hope that your cash reserves would enable you to, survive, or take risk. And risk taking is part of, I think, a necessary mindset in circumstances such as these. So it's true to say that, trying to go ahead with so many external factors that influence your capability to run your product, your event, and to what degree, means that you've got to have an element of risk taking about you. But you've also got to be immensely determined, because you're in for a battle. Now, I should add really quickly that I feel so much empathy for all of the people that I've met over the years who are in our industry, some of whom are having forced to leave it, and some of them that don't have the privilege of being able to run events right now. And my heart genuinely goes out to them. And if there's anything that comes from this that might help them, then that will be a good thing.
Yeah.
So I don't take any of it for granted. I am fortunate, but I do think that what you do is create your own luck as well, because you need the right mindset. But the mindset that really captured, I suppose, the key months for me came from different quarters and unexpected quarters. So to start with, we're all in this together. I remember receiving phone calls from so many people.
Yeah.
You could call them friends, because they are, but many of them are in consumer event organizing space. So you could also call them competitors, just saying, how are you, and sharing experiences. And that talks to the nature of the people that I think work in the event world. By and large, they're very good, wholesome hearted people, and that's a great thing to fall back on. Secondly, there is this can-do attitude, and I remember running into Chris Hughes, who seemed to turn every one of his events that were previously music and food based into a cinema, and good on him. But what he said was, this is like running water. It's going to travel somewhere, and I don't have the luxury of not running my business. So I'm going to change the way we do things. And as a consequence, I think Chris ran 13 events over the summer. I mean, he was run absolutely ragged, but he showed a determination and a spirit and a mindset that said, there is no choice, I'm going to do this. And then you get the benevolent approach, which I was struck by Lou Kiwanuka with her ops nest that she started right at the start of it. I met Lou, fun enough, my last social engagement was at Confex, and I met Lou there, and we promised to have a cup of coffee. And I thought, I instantly thought, I like Lou, I like this lady. And then I saw what she was doing, and my God, what a tonic for people who are at home struggling in real dire circumstances, to be able to reach out to a community in that context of operations staff, teams, and say, you're not alone, and here's how we can navigate through this. So around mindset, what I'm driving at is, it's not one particular mindset that will enable you to succeed, but you do need to be very overtly conscious about having to have a cup half full and not half empty. And I think the will to continue and just carry on is really, really important. It's helped, by the way, because I've got a son who's right now studying, well, not studying, he's training to be a Royal Marine. He's in week 12. So if I think anything I do is hard, on occasions I speak to him, I get to understand mine's a breeze.
We'll have to get him on. He can do a sort of physical training session in the industry. I think you're right with mindset, and actually that goes for all levels and all rungs of the ladder, I think, regardless of where you're at in any organization. Because if you're in sales, you've got to have a really positive mindset if you're going to convince an exhibitor or a brand or a sponsor to come on board, right? I think generally in life, people, want to be, hear people that are upbeat and actually have confidence about what they're doing. I'm not saying just take it to the nth degree, but and it has to be authentic. But I think that's really going to help. You spoke about a Chris Hughes, a CEO level or an owner level, but what I'm saying, even from an ops level, in terms of a junior ops or junior marketing or junior sales or whatever, I think everyone has to try and have that mindset. Would you agree? It's sort of.
Yeah, totally. And actually, I discovered something. I don't spend too much time looking inwardly, but I did discover that throughout all of this, my cup was half full rather than half empty. I didn't know that. Actually, I'd got no reason to question it. But I tell you, when we announced the postponement of the dateline for our first London event, I had to go naturally back to a number of contracted sponsors and partners. And a whole raft of them said, it's lovely that you've got the willingness and the capability to do this, but we're not coming. And the whole conversation at that point around you're in a contractual arrangement went to dust because they just said, we're not coming. In some cases, our companies won't permit our staff to engage in this activity. So getting up every day and trying to convince people that this is a good thing and that it will be positive and the experience will be rewarding is really important. So, and that goes across the patch. And you see me, I don't have a green screen. You see this study that I come to every day. My commute's about 3 meters. And at times I can't pretend that it's easy sitting in here doing this stuff. It's not for anybody, but you've got to have the right mindset to be able to get through it all.
Tell me about it. If I wanted to spin my camera around, which if I tried to, it'd probably explode. You could probably see my bed behind me. But that's another show as well. So yeah, you have to. You get up, you do this, you sit in a room for 15 hours a day, and you have to try and be positive. Okay, so you ran the shows. We have got a vaccine on the way, which is fantastic. And we all believe, talking about mindset, that we're going to get back to doing what we want to do sooner rather than later. We touched on it before and you were going to speak about it now. Talk to me about your views, and I know you're not Nostradamus, we've established that, but in terms of shows of the future, all different shapes and sizes, do you want to give us your view of what they might look like, how we mobilize people, that sort of thing? It'd be really good to get your impression of the future.
So I think the first thing to talk about is the lead into the recovery, and whether we choose to like it or not, there are some marked advantages that come out of our last 9-10 months. One of them is this focus on screen time and the fact that communities have been built throughout that period. You're doing one here, right? So you're creating a community that did not exist and probably would not have been created in your normal working life were it not for the circumstances that we're in. And I think communities are quite key. There is screen fatigue, I'm certain of that, and there's an immense, the flip side of that is there's an immense hunger to get back to interacting with social animals. But whilst we're not able to do that, taking the circumstances that we're in to your advantage is really important. So we're a consumer show. LinkedIn is not a platform for us, but what we chose to do was to use Instagram TV, and we would never have done that before, but to maintain a relevant, and that's important, but a relevant dialogue with our audience. So we took, through Instagram TV, a number of experiences. We took people from their desks into private collections, car collections they never would have seen before, with obviously the help and willingness of an owner in California, in Spain, etc. So what we were doing was maintaining a relevant dialogue, giving them an experience that they valued and associating it with, well, you'll see this collection if you come to our event in September. And what we were doing underneath all of that, which is obvious to anyone, is building data. And there can't have been a greater need to build data. There isn't, because of the vast rotation of people, sadly, in their roles. Most of the data pools, I would imagine, that existed in March are useless. So maintain a relevant dialogue with your customer base, build a data asset that will enable you, when the plane comes out of the hangar will enable you to take off. And I think that's really important, and it's not all bad. I do have a concern about, it's not a concern, it doesn't keep me awake, but I do think that there is an overload of content, and I think that within that there's an opportunity. I think content's omnipresent. Relevance of content is really important. I think that when it comes back to particularly trade show environments, I think there's something that good that might come out of this, because we might be able to create really high value content for which people are more prepared to pay. So to use the content in our events as a revenue stream. I saw this week that Centaur Media, who I used to run their events, have replaced their Festival of Marketing, which is an immense experience for 1,000 marketeers over 3 days, into online offerings. But they are very boldly, and their content's amazing, by the way, but they're charging for it £180 for a 3-day pass to a digital event. And I think if the quality of the content matches the value proposition, people will pay for it. So I think that's a good thing. But in and around what we do, and I'm going back to trade shows as opposed to consumer shows specifically, there is going to be a massive emphasis on experience, because you don't want just to come and learn. And anyway, in the last 10 months, people have been learning online. So that's not a compelling reason, unless the content's really rich. But they will come away, if you get it right, with a fantastic emotive experience. And I've always, even when I was running trade shows, wanted to create this kind of holy moment when a lady or a man go back, they come to an event that I run, they go back home, they have dinner with their partner, and they say what a great time they had. Not one effective time, but what a great time they had.
Sorry, did they come to the show together and go home, or were they?
Well, there are.
They didn't go home together, that they met at the show. I was just getting a bit confused.
No, I'm just talking about referring to an experience that you've got at a trade show, which might traditionally not be that exciting, but referring to it because you've had such a great time. And I think that the experience level of what we do will have to rise hugely, because, and I also think, and it's obvious, but long gone are the days where we'll be talking about the credibility of thousands of attendees. The numbers are irrelevant. It'll be who those people are. It'll be the quality of interaction that they get and the quality of experience that they get. That's what's going to drive the future. Long before COVID, there was a gentle but rapidly accelerating movement towards regionalization rather than globalization. I don't think that's gone away. I think it will be accelerated. And so possibly the modeling going forward will be much more regionally advantage than it would be running blockbuster shows that people fly to Las Vegas for, because I'm not sure that is going to happen for a while. And the business travel aspect is another obvious thing to tap into.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think obviously, international travel possibly still going to be compromised for a period of time. So I think the likes of Mobile World Congress are now going regional. And as you say, some of the other shows as well. I mean, obviously CES, which is on this week or was on a few days ago, is online. Interesting point that you make about data sets. I mean, we all have attended virtual events and webinars. And I think personally, that sort of in between the physical events, they can be used to keep dialogue with the community and build data. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. As long as there's relevance running through it. And my concern around the omnipresence of content is that some of it, frankly, is worthless. And you can be caught up in a fog that creates screen fatigue. And a good friend of mine who won't be watching this, so it's fine, is senior. He's a school friend, and he's very senior in Facebook. He said to me, "I'm sick and tired with screens. I want to get to an event." Well, what more to say?
If you tell me his name, I'll send him the video afterwards. Never speak to you again. What sort of advice? I know we sort of spoke about this in the mindset, but in terms of people listening, sort of advice have you got for them in terms of the return to live? Whether that be from operational, marketing, sales. Do you have any sort of sage words that people might,
I don't think I have an insight into the trade world because I'm not in it right now. I do a bit of consulting around trade businesses, but I wouldn't confess to be a trade expert and know the mindset that's taking place there. But I think it starts with an interpersonal survival guide. My interpersonal survival guide is centered around trying to be happy, and there are some things that will enable that, and there are some that will not.
Sure.
So I'm very conscious about taking a diet around news. You know, it ain't much, there's nothing uplifting. It's rather insular. So I diet on news. I don't bathe in it. Social media, I fast around. So when the moment's right, I consciously dip into social media. I think it's a useful tool, but I don't want it to be my crutch.
Sure.
And if there's anything to overindulge in, it's, you know, drown in customer contact, because you'd be amazed, even if you're getting negative responses, as I am, to sales proposals, you're having a dialogue, you're interacting with people, and you're understanding how they feel and what the landscape looks like. So if there's any recommendation across the patch, and that's not just a sales related statement, pick up the phone, don't dial, don't use your keyboard, pick the phone up and talk to people. You'd be amazed how rewarding that can be. And it will enable you to understand a great deal more than you ever could glean from a keyboard. That's the truth of it. So whether you're operationally facing, revenue facing, whether you're in finance, talk to your customers.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And some people have commented about resilience. Corby's commented here, resilience is key. Jay agrees with you. Martin Clark made a good point about lateral flow tests, how we get back to people being confident of going into a venue, because normal COVID tests obviously might take a bit of time to come back. So that's going to instill confidence as well. In terms of events that you're looking forward to attending, obviously your own, but what events haven't you been able to get to, whether it's a hobby, interest, whatever, that you really like to be going to in the future?
You know, I launched a show that was a rival to Confex, so that I might say Confex would feel odd. Actually, Confex, because it's our community, it's our people. I spent 2 days there back in February, and the serendipity of interaction and seeing people I haven't seen for years, sharing experiences. So I long for the idea that our own event marketplace might re-emerge, and I think it will. By the way, it will take time, but I think it will. I want to get to an awards and see people happy because of the great work that they've done.
Yeah.
I've got 2 submissions still in the 2019 shortlist, 2019 Exhibition News Awards. I'm thinking, bugger, they'll have forgotten the shows existed. But I was hopeful that I might pick one up. You could hope and dream. But going to an event where I can see celebration around the good work that our sector does is the answer. I want to go to competitive events because it's not a hardship for me. I'm going to car events. I'm interested in cars, so that's not a bad thing either. Although there won't be very many, because most of them are predicated by an audience volume that's really difficult to manage in a COVID-safe way. So yeah, that doesn't really answer your question, does it? But I've tried.
No, I mean, it does. I mean, you've got an interest in specialist shows, and that's fantastic. I speak to people that want to go to rock concerts. Yes, someone else wants to see their son play rugby. I guess the common thread that runs throughout this is the interaction, right? Whether it's with a small group, big group of people. So, Andrew, it's been fascinating talking to you today. Thank you, everyone that's watching. I think the takeaways from this, as we all know, and we all have tried to be over the last few months, is be resilient, speak to people, collaborate. And we're not too far away, I believe, from getting back to what we want to do, or at least actually be able to talk about roadmap to the future. So thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.